Hi there. I'm Leolia Lewis, and welcome to another edition of New Day, New Beginnings. Now, today, my question for you is: have you ever been uh, caught up, like really caught up in a bad situation? So much so that you didn't know which way to turn. So much so that you would constantly, your head is just constantly spinning. You're asking yourself a million questions, yet you're getting no answers. Or even have you ever been out and about, just out and about somewhere, but you've seen someone looking maybe strange or even lost, and sometimes even acting strange, maybe talking to themselves? Well, I have. And I often wonder what happened, what went wrong in their life to bring them to this type of point. Who or what have they lost to bring them down to such despair? And that brings me to today's lesson. And my lesson is titled Sick in Mind or Sick at Heart, because one affects the other. Now, I don't know. Sometimes I just look about even things that are going on today. I mean, and sometimes people's lives are so disrupted by things that are so unimaginable, disastrous. We see it every day on the news, and I constantly think about the flood victims. I can't even imagine this water being up to my ceiling and you scrambling to get to the second floor or the roof just to avoid the water. And the water washing away houses and your cars and taking down buildings. This is a disaster. Loss before your very eyes of family, friends, things, your house. And today's story is one of them. It's based on loss. And it's about how someone sick at heart can become sick in mind. Why? It's all due to excessive, I call it excessive, and it is excessive heartache. Now, my story, yeah, and it's a Western, by the way. My story is about a man who took his wife and his young son. His son was only 2 at the time, but they took him and they went on a riverboat cruise. And the riverboat was taking them down to New Orleans. And it was a beautiful day, and everything was fine, and they were having a wonderful time. And all of a sudden, there was an explosion. An explosion actually on the ship caused by a boiler that blew up. And of course, everybody was thrown every which way. And he and her, and I guess the boy, were all thrown overboard. But later he was found and brought ashore. And then later, his wife's body was recovered and brought ashore, but not his son. His son was never recovered. And this is when he really became sick at heart. You know, a broken heart is one of the hardest things to live with or to get through. And Psalm 147:3 says, He, meaning the Lord, He healeth the broken of heart and bindeth up their wounds. And He can get us through whatever our problem is, even something as disastrous as what we see going on. Through our prayers, that's why I'm always talking about praying for strength and guidance. These people need our prayers for them because they need the strength now. And through our prayers, we do manage to get through one day at a time because God gives us the strength that nobody else can. And Mr. Wingate, that was his name, through his heartache, he still believed that his son was alive. And he felt that somebody had actually found him and taken him home and raised him for their own. And this put him in a whole different mindset because now he's on a mission to find his son. Now, he had searched for years. Don't forget, he was only 2 at the time. And now it's 10 years later, and he's still on that mission. And he searched for many places for many years, many, many towns, many states. He's been all across the country. And now, at 10 years later, he's having these bulletins printed up with a description of how the boy would be looking at age 12. So we had these bulletins printed up, and it had a picture, not a picture, I'm sorry, a description of him saying boy missing, age 12. He had dark brown hair, he had dark eyes, but the distinguishing feature was he had a birthmark on the inner side of his arm. So he was offering now a $2,000 reward for the return of his son. And back then, $2,000 was a lot of money. Well, he was a rich man. So that's why he had been searching for 10 years already. And so now these bulletins were all across the country. And he had already paid numerous investigators over the years, but of course, to no avail. So now the bulletins reached this company called the Gordon Detective Agency. So that was led by a Captain Gordon. But in actuality, these were really bounty hunters, and they were using the title because it made them seem more legitimate. But they got a hold of the bulletins. So they were out west, just looking, but they went to Norfolk, and then they noticed that in that town of Norfolk, they had a lot of young boys. So they thought, well, this would be a good place to search. We might get lucky. So they were thinking of a clever way that they could really get to see them and actually check it out. So what they did was they decided, we'll post a contest and we'll have it at the water trough. And the contest would be saying it would be a quarter. So the man said he would flip the quarter, over the water trough, but whoever could catch the quarter before it fell in the water trough, he could keep it. So, of course, these are young boys, so they're going to try it. That's fun, and I'll get a quarter just for catching it. So they were all taking turns, and you know, sure enough, they knew that if they could get them to do that, they'd probably roll up their sleeve. Now, if they roll up their sleeve, then they'd be able to see the birthmark on the inner side of their arm. So each boy was rolling up his sleeve, trying to catch the quarter, and so forth. Um, so then here comes Mark. He's coming over to see what's going on. And come on, Mark, you want to try? You want to try? So, of course, he does. So he rolled up his sleeve. And when he rolled up his sleeve, the first thing they saw was the birthmark on the inner side of his arm. So this time the man, he looked at his partner and he flipped the coin, but he flipped it a little bit higher to make sure that Mark caught it before it went under the water, because then he'd get an opportunity to talk to him and find out who he was. And that's what happened. So Mark, of course, caught the quarter. And being very friendly, they went over and asked him, hey, son, what's your name? And how old are you? And he said, I'm 12. And, well, who are your parents? And he told them. And he said, well, do you live nearby? And he said, oh, yeah, we're just a couple miles outside of town. So, anyway, after that, they got all the information they wanted. So he gave him the quarter, and Mark just thanked him for the quarter and went on. He said he had to get to school. So he left. And when he left, these men, now they sent a wire to Mr. Wingate to come to North Fork, because they said they had found his son. So now when Mr. Wingate arrived, the men asked for their money. But he said, well, no, I can't pay you until I have proof. I've got to have proof. I want to see for myself. So now that they knew where Mark lived, the three of them proceeded to go out to the ranch. And just about that time, Mark was coming home from school. Now, his father was introducing, come here, Mark, I want you to meet Mr. Wingate. And well, he recognized the other two, but he didn't say anything. He just said, how do you do? But what happened was that fast, Mr. Wingate was now so excited, he grabs Mark's arm and pushes up his sleeve, and he saw the birthmark. And that's when his mind took over, because now all he could envision was he had found his son. All he said was, oh, Robert, I've been looking for you for so long, son. And that made me think of Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, because that says, blessed are they that mourn. And he had been mourning, MOURN, for 10 years. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. And he was comforted. In that split second, all he could envision was he had found his son. Well, when he said that, of course, Mark didn't understand. And he said, well, my name is Mark. But Mr. Wingate, his mind was now focused on, this is his son, Robert. So he was acting like he was excusing Mark for making a mistake. He said, oh, that's all right, son. Like Mark didn't know who he was. But now Lucas is interrupting, and he's saying, now, wait a minute, Mr. Wingate. He's not your son, and you can't just come in here and claim that he is. So he's saying, I'm sorry for your loss, but Mark is mine. But Mr. Wingate's mind now couldn't hear or even conceive, because he insisted Now he's taking a whole different approach. He says, no, 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 I'm going to fight you in every court and I'll prove he's mine. And at that very moment, Mr. Wingate had a seizure and fell down on the ground. He passed out. He passed out because now his mind is causing him such anxiety. So they called the doctor, and the doctor came out to the ranch, and it was his heart. But see, our mind can get us so confused. It affects our heart. Just like when we have a broken heart, it affects our mind. So we had to stay on the ranch for a couple of days, the doctor's orders, and recuperate. And the doctor was saying, well, yeah, because of the long stagecoach ride, so forth and so on, and his anxiety, just thinking they told him that they found his son, and that's all he had on his mind ever since then. But the point right here is, isn't it ironic that Mr. Wingate's life is now in the hands of the man he just threatened to fight in court? He was weak, he was helpless, and yet the man he threatened is nursing him back to health. God works in mysterious ways. He gives you blessings from places you don't even expect. But anyway, during that time, while Mr. Wingate had to stay at the house, he actually told them the whole story about the New Orleans trip, the riverboat accident, how he lost his wife, and all the thousands of dollars he had been spending over the past 10 years to find his son. But his last statement was, but it was worth it. I finally found my son. I finally found my Robert. So his mind was still saying, this is Robert, when in actuality, he wasn't having it any other way. Now, at this point, Lucas saw that, he was going to have to prove this to this man. So he said to him, he said, well, okay, I can prove to you that Mark is my son. And Luke went and got his Bible because, back then, everything they did was noted in the Bible. So he brought out the Bible, and it showed their wedding date. It showed their names. It showed Mark's birth date. It showed he had legal papers. And after all that, it still didn't satisfy Mr. Wingate. But he just blew it off, and he said, well, you could have written this at any time. That's how determined he was to believe that he had found his son. Nothing would make him think otherwise. But later on, Mark was talking to his father, and he said, I really feel bad for Mr. Wingate. He says, do you think maybe he's a little sick in the head? But his father said, no, he's not sick in the head. He's sick in heart. And he said, and that's the same way I would be if I lost you and I was searching for you, trying to find you all this time. And while they were having that conversation, Mr. Wingate was in the other room praying. And he was saying, thank you, Lord, for returning my son. So even though he never forgot prayer, he was still ignoring the fact that this was someone else's son. Now, I want to read Jeremiah chapter 29. I just want to read verse 11 to 13 because to me, this is relevant. And this says, for I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not evil, to give you an expected end. So it's God saying, I know your mind. I know what you think. You're not trying to think anything evil. You want peace, and I know what you want. I know what you want your ending to be. He says, then shall you call upon me, and you shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you. I will hear you. The Lord's telling him, you shall seek me, you shall find me, when you shall search for me with all your heart. And verse 14 simply says, and I will be found of you, saith the Lord. And I'd say all that to say, even though his mind wasn't rational, he never forgot to pray. He was still trusting God to give him back his son. And in Psalm 34, verse 18, it says, the Lord is nigh, close to them that are of a broken heart, and he saveth them that be in a contrite heart, be of a contrite heart. And contrite simply means feeling or showing sorrow. And he's been doing that for years. And the Lord understands that, and he's still close to him. And he's going to give him the end that he's been searching for, but maybe not in the way he expected. So let's go forward. Now, Mr. Wingate is well enough to go to the hotel. He doesn't have to stay at the ranch any longer. Now, when he goes to the hotel, that's where he meets the boy, the orphan boy, who brought his bags up to his room. And the boy said, if you need anything else, sir, just ask for $1.10. And he said, what do you mean $1.10? He said, oh, that's what they call me. He said, well, where'd you get that name from? He said, the townspeople. And he said, because I'm an orphan. And even though two other families had invited him to come live with them, he chose to stay in town and work. And he said, I just do odd jobs around town. And he said, a man asked for a shoe shine, and he gave me 10 cents for the shine, but he gave me $1 tip. And they started calling him $1.10. I thought that was pretty unique. But the point I'm making is this boy had been the orphan of the town for quite some time. But at any rate, so where was I? Okay, so now the man gave him $1 tip. So let's fast forward. Now we're going to go back to the detectives. What are they up to? They're scheming now. Now they're not getting their money. They're getting impatient. So they didn't expect to have any opposition. So McCain's becoming like a thorn in their side. And so they went and asked Mr. Wingate again for their money, but he was saying, I'm not giving you any money until I have the boy legally. So now they go back and they start plotting. Now they figure, now if we can get McCain to get in a gunfight, we kill Lucas McCain, Mr. Wingate gets the boy, we get our $2,000, and life goes on. That was the plan. But they had to get rid of McCain. But in the meantime, the sheriff had done some of his own checking up, and he found out that they were bounty hunters that were wanted in other states. So he told Lucas, I found out that they're really under this Gordon agency. but they're bounty hunters and they're wanted in 3 different states. So Lucas went back to tell Mr. Wingate to tell him of their scheme and who they really are. But to no avail. You know why? Because he was still mindset on getting that boy, and he didn't listen to anything Lucas had told him. But when Lucas went to leave the hotel, they were waiting outside for him. So the one man called his bluff by saying, I hear you're real good with that rifle. They call you a bear. He said, yeah, I'm a bear. So you know what happens after that. The guy says draw, and of course, he was dead before he hit the ground. So now Lucas made the other guy, his partner, the captain, this Captain Gordon, he made him confess that they knew that wasn't Wingate's son. And he wanted him to go confess it to Mr. Wingate and the sheriff. And his only reply was, well, Wingate was paying $2,000 and your son was as good as any. How devious can you be? In other words, they didn't care whose kid they had as long as they got their money. So, of course, once Mr. Wingate heard the truth, he did apologize to Mr. McCain, and he also, for all the trouble he had caused and called himself a fool, and asked Mark for his forgiveness. And Psalm 147, verse 3 says, He, meaning the Lord, healeth the broken in heart and bindeth up their wounds. And now he's healing him. But the most wonderful part of the story is Mr. Wingate, when he went back to his hotel room, he asked the boy of $10. He said, how would you like to come back to St. Louis with me? A boy needs somebody. And I'm thinking, no, not only does the boy need somebody, so does he. He said, I've got this big house and I live in it all by myself, and you could come and stay with me. And if you wanted to learn another kind of business, I could teach you. I have a leather tanning business, and one day you could take it over and run it, just like being my real son. And the boy said, I like that. And Wingate said, I've already got a sign over the door that says Wingate and Son. And based on that, let's look at Chronicles chapter 1 right there, just the first three, verse 3 and 4, because verse 3 says, Blessed be the Father of mercies. Blessed be God, the Father of mercies, and the God of all comfort, with comfort, who comforteth us in all of our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort them which are in trouble by the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted. So he's simply saying, now the Lord comforted Mr. Wingate. Now Mr. Wingate can comfort the boy. They can both now have a good life. He'll have a son. The boy will have a father. God is good all the time. Even when we don't understand, even in our worst times, he's going to get us through for something far better. And that's why I'm so insistent about you reading his word, meditating on his word, but most of all, obeying his word. So once you do that, as long as you trust and believe, you will receive. And that's what happened here. And my closing words for today are God isn't asking us to figure it out, He's asking you to trust that He already has. And until next week, I'm Lelia Lewis. Thanks for joining me.